Hey everyone, welcome to another training video in SC-300 Microsoft Identity and Access Administrator series. In this training video, I will cover the module on configure and manage a Microsoft Entra Tenant. The key learning objectives of this module are configure company branding, configure and manage the Microsoft Entra roles, the built-in roles and the custom roles, configure delegation by using the administrative units, evaluate the effective permissions, configure and manage the domains in Microsoft Entra and Microsoft 365. Finally, we'll talk about configuring the tenant-wide settings. My name is Navneet Kumar and I'm a Microsoft certified trainer. In case you are new to this channel, please subscribe it for future updates. Without any further ado, let's get started. First of all, let's talk about the company branding, which is actually used to customize the Entra Tenant page with your own logo. In Microsoft Entra ID, the company branding allows the organizations to customize the appearance of the sign-in and access panels for more personalized and consistent experience for the users. This includes the customization elements like the sign-in logo, as I mentioned earlier. You can add your company's logo in the login page. Background image, you can put the customization by putting your own background of the sign-in page. Color scheme you can choose. You can set a custom color to align with your company's branding requirements. Custom text also can be included for this personalized text can be like the support information or the privacy policies you can put as per your company's requirement. These settings can be added to the company branding, and by configuring this company branding, the organizations can ensure that the users have a familiar and professional experience when accessing the corporate resources. It also reinforces the brand identity and the trust. Next is configuring and managing the Microsoft Entra role, which can be configured through different portals, be it Entra portal, which is entra.microsoft.com, the Entra Admin Center, the Azure portal, portal.azure.com, Microsoft 365 Admin Center, which is admin.microsoft.com, and Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps portal, that is the security.microsoft.com portal. The roles can be configured from these different portals. The Microsoft Entra roles are intended for the IT admins, app developers, or the Microsoft 365, Office 365, Azure, or Dynamics CRM online subscribers. They define the access to the Entra ID resources. They should not overlap with the Azure roles by default. They do not in fact overlap because the Azure has its own roles, be it contributor or the owner or reader or services specific roles like the virtual machines, virtual network and all. So the Azure has its own roles. The Entra ID roles do not overlap with them. We have built-in roles that we can use, and in fact it is recommended to use the built-in roles wherever possible. But sometimes if these built-in roles do not suffice the need of our business, then we need to create the custom roles. The role is nothing but a group of permissions, and these custom roles can be created in the premium directory. So you require the premium plan 1 at least of the Entra ID to create these custom roles. You can add these permissions to these roles, create these custom roles, and then assign them to the identities based on your requirement. You need to be very careful while creating these custom roles, otherwise you can provide more inclusive or excessive access to the users. You should also follow the principle of the least privilege while creating these roles, and take time while creating or defining these roles and put a proper name and description for these roles so that they are properly chosen by the IT administrators while delegating the permissions. When it comes to assign the role, the assignment of the roles can be done. That can be the built-in role or the custom role that we can assign. The assignment is done to the security principals, which can be the users, groups, service principals, or the managed identities in the Entra ID. The managed identities are actually the identities whose credentials are rotated or changed by the Entra ID automatically, and these managed identities are actually used by the software objects, by the applications or scripts to authenticate non-interactively, just like with service principal. But the service principals we use to manage the secrets of these service principles, so that administrative overhead is reduced with managed identities. So security principles need to be decided, and then you should follow the principle of least privilege when you assign these roles. So take care of the minimum permissions assigned to the users based on their requirements only. This is one of the important pillar of the zero trust as well. Assigning the users or groups to a role, we identify the identities that can be added to a role for the permissions. Alternative methods to assign the roles we can pick. We should use the principle of least privilege when assigning these roles. Assigning Azure roles to the subscriptions or broader scope is possible through the Azure portal. You can define the scope of the role assignment in Azure for the management groups, which is the topmost container which manages the subscriptions, or at the subscription level, or at the resource group level for more granular control, or we can also delegate the permissions at the resource level as well. We have dozens of built-in roles in Azure. We also can create the custom roles by selecting our own resource providers and the resource types and the actions. I have done several videos around the role assignments in Entra ID or the Azure portal. I will put the reference videos into the description of this video. To keep this video short, you can refer to those videos for the permission assignment in Entra ID or in Azure. Using the Microsoft Entra roles for the common delegation scenarios, these can be the scenarios where we want to restrict and manage the application creation, assigning owners to an application, assigning a built-in administrative role that grants access to manage configuration in Microsoft Entra ID for all the applications, or creating a custom role defining very specific permissions and assigning it to the required security principle. When you delegate the administrative tasks, you just want to keep a few terms in mind, like the least privilege, just in time, and just long enough access you are providing. Delegate the administrative tasks with built-in roles. This is possible by doing the built-in roles. You can delegate the users required permissions. For app administrators, let's say password administrator role, group administrator role, or delegating app registration, the application developer role, or for delegating the app ownership, enterprise application owner role or application registration owner roles can be assigned. When to use the administrative units? Basically, the administrative units are the containers inside Entra ID that are used to store the identities like users or the groups and the devices. This can be used as a scope of delegation, so we can restrict the users or groups with permissions limited to that particular administrative unit. You can think of it like that: you have a larger organization and you are creating multiple administrative boundaries within that, as the term suggests, administrative unit. So for an instance, you work for a university, it has multiple departments within that, so school of business, school of engineering, security team, executive team, and then you put the identities into these containers. You can also relate them with the organizational units that we use in our on-premises Active Directory domains. So these are nothing but the logical containers containing the users, groups, or devices, and we delegate access on these administrative units to restrict the access of individuals to these business units or administrative units only. The deployment scenario for this we have already discussed. A large university composed of many autonomous schools, school of business, school of engineering, and so on. Each school has a team of IT admins who control access, manage users, and set policies for their school. So we can create administrative units for them, and then we can delegate the permissions. The administrative tasks could include like create a role with administrative permissions over the Microsoft, only Microsoft Entra users in the business school. business school administrative unit, and then creating an administrative unit for the school of business, populating the administrative unit with only the business school students and staff, then adding the business school IT team to the role along with its scope. The common delegation scenarios for administrative units are like you want to assign the types of authentication method, creating a dedicated help desk admin to control users and groups within the admin units, or set up a person who manages the licenses to tools and the SaaS applications. When you delegate the administrative tasks, you keep these things in mind. We have already discussed least privilege, just in time, and just long enough access. The administrative units, delegation, authentication, administration is there. So authentication, administration role, delegating the license administrator, delegating users, groups, and password management. We can use the user administrator roles. To evaluate the effective permission for the Microsoft Entra role, this table can help you. The permissions in Microsoft Entra ID, the permissions, consent, or the authorization to perform these specific actions. Who gets permissions? Examples, default permissions for each identity. If this identity is a member of your directory, which means that it is a native user or maybe the user of your directory, so it can enumerate the list of users, invite external users, change their passwords, manage photo, create groups, and so on. So these are the permissions to the member users. They have broader access. External users are typically the guest users that you invite with their external identities, be it social media identity or the identity provider that you have done the collaboration with. So read own properties only, change their passwords, search for groups, cannot invite groups, and so on. In fact, this is configurable. You can manage the settings for the access for the external users, whether they will be having inclusive or restrictive access. So that can be controlled. We will see that in the next slide. Applications have the app must be registered, app API and permissions assigned in the registration. These are the applications or service principals. Devices, the device identities must be registered or joined to the Microsoft Entra Tenant. In my previous video, I have covered the device enrollment to the Entra ID, either registered or Entra join or hybrid join scenarios. Augment or restrict the permissions. We can define the permissions for the external users by going to the user settings. As you see here, that guest users have limited access to the properties and memberships of directory objects. In fact, we can go to the external users, external identity settings. Under the Entra portal, we have the option. We can configure it. And there is a demonstration for external identities collaboration that I have done in my another video. I will put the link in the description of this video for your reference. Analyze the permissions, role permissions, specific permissions granted when a role assigned to a user or group, guest, service principal, additional permissions given to ensure a basic level of functionality when assigned to the guest users or the service principals. When it comes to the configure and manage the custom domains, by default, the Entra ID comes with an available domain or mandatory domain, which is ending with .onmicrosoft.com. Then you need to add your own domain into the directory. You need to validate this domain by proving the ownership of it by creating the text record or the MX record in the DNS zone of that domain. And then you can validate this domain on your directory and use it for the user's UPNs. To configure the tenant-wide settings, you can do the tenant-wide settings from the properties of it. Tenant-wide settings apply to the entire tenant, and these global values set some default behaviors to be applied to all users and properties. Manage members and guest users also, like who can register the applications or restrict access to the Microsoft Entra ID administrative portal. Maybe you do not want that the standard users can access this administrative portal. Sign in with LinkedIn or manage security default. Security default let you apply the security baseline defined by Microsoft for your tenant when you do not have enough security strength in-house. External collaboration settings you can do, restricting who can invite guests and other settings. So these settings are also configurable. tenant-wide. We also have user settings that we can configure in Entra ID. That can be for the app registration related setting. For an instance, users can register the applications or not. Administration portal, whether you want to restrict the access to the admin portal for standard users. LinkedIn account connections allow users to connect their work or school account with the LinkedIn or not. These settings are manageable from the user settings. User settings for external users are also configurable for app registration, administration portal, LinkedIn account. You see, this is something I was talking about earlier in the screenshot, that guest user access, whether you want it most inclusive, where you want that the guest users can have the same access as the members, as I discussed in the previous table. So this is doable, but it is better to keep it most restrictive. That option, that is to allow the guest users access, is restricted to properties and memberships of their own directory objects only. Tenant properties are configurable, where you can change the tenant's display name, find the country or the region associated with your tenant. You cannot change the country or region after the tenant is created. So during the creation of the Entra tenant, you define the region. Later it cannot be changed. Finding the location associated with your tenant, tenant ID, which shows you the unique tenant ID, technical contact, global privacy contact, and privacy statement URLs you can provide so that the users can see them in their accounts. When they go to their view account, they can see these tenant properties on their account. There are several reference materials for classic subscription administration roles, understanding the Azure role definitions, privileged identity management for time-bound access to delegate. We will be in fact discussing that in much more details in the later modules, enabling the multi-factor authentication